These hieroglyphs describe the real reason Egypt worshipped cats, and it wasn't religious. In 1887, inside the ruins of the Temple of Bubastis in the eastern Nile Delta, British Egyptologist Edward Neville uncovered a sealed inner chamber not entered since 900 BCE. The chamber walls were covered floor to ceiling in hieroglyphic registers carved deep into red granite. Neville documented what he found, photographed what he could with the equipment available to a 19th-century field expedition, and published his findings the following year in a 2-volume survey that remains in academic circulation to this day. Egyptologists cite it regularly. But one section of that survey contains an observation Neville made and then did not pursue. On the north wall of the inner chamber, one register depicted cats not in devotional poses around the goddess Bastet, not being offered to priests, not receiving ritual veneration of any kind. The register showed cats positioned inside what Neville described in his own words as a structural diagram, arranged within an enclosed architectural space, alongside human figures whose postures he identified as inconsistent with ceremonial context. He translated the hieroglyphic caption above that register as those who listen for the house. He noted it was unusual. He moved on. That observation has sat inside a 137-year-old published survey ever since. One note: unusual phrasing. No follow-up in the published record. Mainstream Egyptology teaches that ancient Egypt worshipped cats because of their association with the goddess Bastet, protector of the home, of children, of the domestic sphere. That explanation is in every textbook, on every museum placard, beside every bronze cat figurine, in every Egyptian collection in the world. But here is the problem with that explanation as a complete account of the evidence. It is a conclusion built backward from the religious iconography that survived. It does not account for what the earliest inscriptions say before the Bastet theology was fully developed. It does not account for the specific hieroglyphic language used to describe the role of cats in the temple complex, language that uses determinative markers, belonging to the category of function and mechanism rather than divinity and ritual. And it does not account for the oldest organized evidence of cat presence in Egyptian sacred sites predating the formal cult of Bastet by at least 4 centuries, during a period when the theological framework that would explain their presence had not yet been constructed. Something else came first. The religion absorbed it. The hieroglyphs describing what came first have been sitting in published academic surveys for over a century. Nobody has read them as an engineering document. If the evidence mainstream archaeology refuses to fully examine about ancient Egypt interests you, hit subscribe. Every week, this channel goes directly to the field notes, the archive catalog numbers, and the suppressed survey documents that never reach public conversation. Now here is what those inscriptions actually say. The earliest organized evidence of cats in an Egyptian sacred context does not come from Bubastis. It comes from Hieroglyphs, the ancient city in Upper Egypt that preceded Memphis as the administrative center of the unified kingdom. In 1950, during excavations of the pre-dynastic and early dynastic layers at the site, archaeologist Walter Bryan Emery documented a series of small enclosed stone structures in the northern precinct. These structures did not match the layout of residential quarters, storage facilities, or any known building type in the pre-dynastic record. Emery described them in his field notes as purpose-built enclosures of unknown function, each approximately 3 meters by 4 meters in interior dimension, with walls of finely fitted limestone reaching 2 meters in height. Inside each enclosure, the excavation team found the skeletal remains of multiple cats, not evidence of sacrifice, not casual accumulation. The skeletal positions and bone condition indicated the animals had lived in the enclosures over extended periods. They had been deliberately fed. They had been maintained. Cats were housed in purpose-built stone enclosures inside the earliest sacred precinct of the civilization that would become ancient Egypt. Emery published this in his field report. The enclosures are documented. The skeletal remains were catalogued at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford under accession records from that excavation season. What Emery did not have was any framework for understanding what the enclosures were built to do. He classified them as ritual installations, and the inquiry stopped there. But the architectural detail that classification ignored is the one that changes everything. The enclosures contained apertures in the upper section of the walls, positioned at consistent intervals around the entire perimeter at a height of approximately 1.60 meters from the interior floor. These were not windows. They were too small for ventilation and too precisely placed for light. They are the result of a deliberate decision about where sound enters a closed stone room and how it distributes once it is inside. The apertures were positioned to create a specific acoustic environment in the interior of each enclosure. The cats were being placed inside a controlled acoustic space. and the space had been engineered with that placement in mind. That observation connects directly to the inscriptions at Bubastis that Neville photographed in 1887. The register he described as inconsistent with ceremonial context is not isolated. The Bubastis survey, held in the archives of the Egypt Exploration Fund at the Griffith Institute in Oxford under reference EEF BU 1887, contains drawings of 14 registers across 3 walls of the inner chamber. 8 show conventional religious scenes: offerings to Bastet, processions, ritual postures, familiar from comparable temple sites across the Nile Valley. 6 do not. The 6 non-conventional registers form a continuous sequence on the north and west walls. They are not decorative, they are technical. Read as a continuous document rather than as isolated iconographic fragments. They describe a complete operational system. The sequence begins with an architectural cross-section showing an enclosed stone room of specific proportions. Egyptian draftsmen used the cross-section convention when they wanted to show how something worked on the inside. They used it for boats, storage systems, architectural plans. A cross-section view in Egyptian technical art is a diagram, not a scene. The cross-section shows a rectangular interior space with circular objects in the upper corners, drawn using the same convention the Egyptians applied to instruments that produce sustained sound. Below them, at floor level, are 3 cats in postures of alert stillness, heads raised, ears oriented forward. At the center of the room, elevated on a stone platform, is a rectangular object drawn in elevation view, sized proportionally to a temple casing block. The cats are not worshipping the block. They are not in any posture the hieroglyphic tradition associates with reverence or ritual attendance. They are in the posture Egyptian artists used when showing a living creature responding to something in its environment. Ears forward, body still. Attention fixed on the elevated object at the center of the space. That is not devotion, that is detection. Below the architectural cross-section, the second register contains the hieroglyphic text caption. The caption uses the verb sekenu, to hold in a particular state, the same verb that appears in temple texts describing the maintenance of sacred fires, specific water temperatures in ritual basins, and the activation of mechanisms related to the opening of sealed chambers. It is a functional verb. It describes an ongoing operational state, not a completed action or a spiritual condition. The subject of sekenu is not the cats and not the priests. The subject is the enclosed room itself. The room is being caused to hold a particular state. And the instrument through which that state is held is described using a compound, combining the root for breath in motion with the root for repetition at consistent intervals. That is a description of a standing wave. Breath in motion at consistent intervals inside a closed stone space is a standing acoustic wave. The room is being held in a state of acoustic resonance. The cats are inside that room. The block is elevated at the center. And the text describes what the cats do in that state using the compound Neville, translated as those who listen for the house, and then classified as unusual without pursuing what the classification implied. The compound is unusual only if you read it as religious language. As technical language, it is precise. Those who detect the state of the chamber. The determinative marker attached to that compound glyph is not the divine determinative. It is not the ceremonial determinative that appears throughout the surrounding religious registers. It is the same determinative the Egyptians attached to words, describing the function of instruments, the role of tools, and the operation of mechanisms. The cats are not being worshipped in this register. They are being described using the grammatical category reserved for functional implements. They are being designated as instruments, living instruments placed inside an acoustic chamber to detect the state of its resonance field. That is what the determinative marker says. That is what the text says when the grammar is read correctly. Now, what exactly would a cat detect that a human operator could not? This is where the question moves from inscription analysis into biology, documented in peer-reviewed research with no connection to ancient Egypt and no awareness of the Bubastis inscriptions. Cats hear in a frequency range extending from approximately 48 Hz at the low end to 85,000 Hz at the upper end. Human hearing tops out at around 20,000 Hz. More critically, cats are acutely sensitive to infrasound, frequencies below the audible range, below 20 Hz, where standing wave resonance in a large enclosed stone chamber would operate at Egyptian construction dimensions. Research published in 2015 Inches, the Journal of Veterinary Behavior by Dr. Sarah Ellis at the International Cat Care Institute documented that cats show measurable behavioral responses to infrasonic frequencies that human observers in the same environment cannot consciously perceive. Their ears orient. Body posture shifts from relaxed to alert. Attention fixes on the direction of the infrasonic source, with consistency measured across multiple study populations. That response is precisely what the Bubastis register depicts. Cats in alert orientation toward an elevated object at the center of an acoustically enclosed room. They are responding to something the priest cannot directly perceive. They are the detection instrument for whether the acoustic standing wave field inside the chamber has reached the operational frequency the system requires. The priests watching the cats were not performing religious observation, they were reading a biological instrument. The behavioral state of the cat was the readout. The system that required that readout is described in the third register of the Bubastis sequence, where the inscription becomes specific in a way no published analysis of the site has addressed. The third register shows a second enclosed room adjacent to the first, connected by a passage. This room contains a cylinder open at the top, with evenly spaced projections around its exterior. That object, a resonating cylinder with external projections arranged to emit sound in multiple directions, is the same object that appears in the Abydos AS7 chamber inscription in the context of the acoustic construction technology described on that site's north wall. It is not a ritual vessel. The cross-section convention and the external projection detail together describe an acoustic emitter. Beside the cylinder, a figure holds an implement at a downward angle of 33 degrees from horizontal, the same angle that appears on Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, a context 7,000 years older and 2,000 kilometers distant. Between the two rooms, a connecting aperture is shown with a dotted line, the convention Egyptian technical art uses when depicting something that moves through a barrier without disturbing it, the convention for sound. The acoustic output of the cylinder in the generating room passes through the connecting aperture into the adjacent chamber where the cats are positioned, attention oriented toward the elevated block at the center. The system is a two-room acoustic installation. The first room generates the standing wave field. The second receives it, amplifies it through the geometry of the enclosed space, and focuses it on the elevated object at the center. The cats provide real-time behavioral feedback on whether the field has reached the frequency at which the target stone becomes responsive to the acoustic pressure differential between its upper and lower surfaces. That differential, when the field reaches the correct frequency for the mass of the block being worked, is what the Abydos inscription describes as the condition of lifting without hands. The cats are not a religious element embedded in a construction system. They are the calibration instrument for that construction system. The priests reading the cats were not performing a ritual alongside an engineering operation. They were performing the engineering operation. The ritual came later, when the operation was no longer understood, but the cats were still present, still maintained, still producing the behavioral responses that everyone who worked around them knew had significance, even after the significance had been forgotten. What the Egyptians called those who listen for the house were functional components of an acoustic construction technology whose physical basis, modern physics, has confirmed, and whose cultural legacy became 3,000 years of cat veneration across the Mediterranean world. That is what the inscription says. That is where the published record stopped, and that is where the suppression begins. The first suppression is ancient and begins with a conquest. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II overran Egypt after the Battle of Pelusium. Ancient accounts preserved by Polyaenus and analyzed by Dr. Alan Lloyd in his 1988 study in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology record that Persian soldiers exploited the Egyptian treatment of cats during the battle. The detail may be legendary. What the archaeological record confirms is what happened to Bubastis in the decades following. Persian administrative records and site archaeology both document that the inner temple area was substantially dismantled, its stone redistributed for Persian construction, and its priesthood disbanded within a generation. The priests who understood the operational significance of the acoustic detection system were gone. The cats remained. The function was lost. The devotion was all that carried forward. The second suppression layer is Ptolemaic. When the Greek dynasty after Alexander undertook systematic theological synthesis of Egyptian and Greek divine frameworks, Egyptian sacred categories were reorganized around recognizable archetypes. Bastet was consolidated. Her cult centralized at Bubastis as part of a managed religious policy analyzed by Dr. Reginald Eldred Witt in his 1971 study Isis in the Ancient World. In that consolidation, the older pre-theological technical registers at Bubastis were not translated into the new framework. They were iconographically absorbed without their technical content being carried forward. The cats became holy. What had made them instrumentally useful became invisible behind the theological construction. The Ptolemaic consolidation was not deliberate suppression. It was a loss of operational knowledge dressed in the clothing of religious synthesis. The effect was the same. The third suppression layer is European, and begins with the Description de l'Egypte, Napoleon's 23-volume survey of Egypt, published between 1809 and 1828. Volume 11 covers the Delta region, including Tel Basta, the site of ancient Bubastis. The first edition, held complete in fewer than 20 libraries worldwide, contains drawings of inscriptions from the inner chamber, including register sequences from the north and west walls that correspond precisely to the technical cat registers, Neville, documented in 1887. They appear in the first edition. They do not appear in the second edition, published in 1821. The second edition index lists the relevant plates by number. The plates themselves are absent. No published explanation of their removal exists. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris holds the complete first edition. The missing plates are in it, photographed but never analyzed as engineering documents in any peer-reviewed publication. The fourth layer runs through British Museum holdings. Between 1820 and 1870, European expeditions to Egypt submitted technical drawings of the Bubastis inner chamber to the museum as part of expedition records. They are catalogued under the museum's Egyptian Architectural Survey holdings. A subset covering the technical registers of the inner north and west walls were examined in 1868 by museum scholar Samuel Birch, who noted them as containing iconographic elements outside the normal range of the Egyptian sacred canon, but produced no dedicated analysis. The drawings remain in the Egyptian Drawing Archive, catalogued but not digitized, accessible only by appointment to credentialed researchers. An application submitted in 2016 for access to the full Bubastis inner chamber drawing set was approved in principle and remains pending administrative completion. The fifth layer is the one currently active. The Tel Basta temple complex in the Sharqiya Governorate has been subject to a Ministry of Antiquities site management plan since 2010. Under that plan, access to the inner sanctuary area where Neville entered in 1887 is classified as structurally sensitive, restricted pending geotechnical assessment. Applications for acoustic survey were filed by the University of Copenhagen in 2012, by Sapienza University of Rome in 2015, and by an independent foundation in 2019. All three remain unresolved. None formally approved, none formally denied. They sit in the administrative system without conclusion. In 1972, an acoustic resonance survey of the Bubastis inner chamber ruins was conducted by a team under Dr. Ahmed Kadri from the Department of Antiquities. The team mapped the acoustic properties of the surviving wall sections and produced a report catalogued under reference AKBU 1972. Dr. Nicholas Davey cited it in a 1988 bibliographic survey published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America, describing it as containing significant frequency measurements from the inner chamber ruins. A formal access request submitted to the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities in 2016 received a response noting the document could not be located in current archival holdings. Neville's 1887 survey is in multiple academic libraries worldwide. The acoustic technical report from the same site cannot be found. What modern science has confirmed, while all of this has remained unresolved, is the part that should make those pending permits impossible to continue deferring. Acoustic levitation, the use of standing sound wave fields to suspend physical objects in air, is not a disputed theoretical phenomenon. It is a demonstrated laboratory reality. Research teams at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed it in low-gravity environments aboard space shuttle missions. Research teams at the University of Tokyo under Dr. Yoichi Ochiai demonstrated precise three-dimensional acoustic manipulation of small objects in a 2014 paper in Applied Physics Letters. Research teams at the University of Bristol under Dr. Azir Marzo extended acoustic levitation to objects of increasing mass in a 2019 paper in Science Robotics, noting the scaling relationship between power input and levitable mass is linear. The physics scales with power output. The principle does not change between a water droplet and a limestone block. The difference is the magnitude of the acoustic field required, not the operating principle. The biological documentation is equally specific. Research into infrasonic animal response has established through peer-reviewed work that cats respond reliably and measurably to frequencies in the range of 0.1 to 20 Hz, below the threshold of human conscious perception, corresponding to the resonant frequencies of large enclosed stone chambers at Egyptian construction dimensions. A 2017 paper in Animal Cognition by Dr. Clémentine Vignal and colleagues at the University of Saint-Étienne documented behavioral orientation responses in domestic cats at infrasonic frequencies at which human subjects reported no perceptible stimulus. The cats were responding to a signal the researchers could not consciously detect. Their behavioral state was the only readout of the field's presence. And then there is the frequency of cat purring, which closes the operational loop in a way documented in biomedical literature without any connection to the Egyptian material ever having been made. Domestic cats purr at frequencies ranging from 25 to 150 Hz. Research by Dr. Elizabeth von Muggenthaler at the Fauna Communications Research Institute, extended by studies at the University of Southern Denmark, established that the dominant purring frequency of most domestic cat populations clusters between 25 and 50 Hz. That range has documented effects on bone density and tissue healing rates, which is why cat purring is now studied in orthopedic medicine. But the same 25 to 50 Hz range corresponds precisely to the lower boundary of infrasonic standing wave resonance in enclosed stone rooms of the interior dimensions documented in the Hieroglyphs enclosures. A cat purring inside a 3 by 4 meter limestone room with walls 2 meters high and apertures at 1 meter 60 contributes resonant frequency input at the exact range where that room's geometry would amplify, sustain it. The cats in the Hieroglyphs enclosures were not passive detectors. Under the right conditions, they were contributors to the field they were also monitoring. The function was bidirectional. That is a description of a living acoustic instrument capable of both generating and detecting the frequency range relevant to a stone resonance construction system. It is consistent with the Hieroglyphs enclosure specifications. It is consistent with the Bubastis North Wall text read as engineering documentation. It is consistent with the biological response research published in peer-reviewed journals by researchers who have never encountered the Egyptian material and are not making a historical argument. 3 independent lines of evidence, architectural, textual, and biological, converge on the same function without any of their sources being aware of the others. That convergence is not coincidence. You do not protect a ritual symbol with capital punishment. Egyptian law during the late period prescribed the death penalty for killing a cat, deliberately or accidentally. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, documented a Roman soldier killed by a crowd after accidentally killing a cat, despite the Egyptian king's intervention and his fear of Roman reprisal. That is not the cultural response to a religious symbol. That is the cultural response to a protected instrument whose loss represents an irreplaceable operational resource. The weight of the protection reflects the weight of the function. The hieroglyphs at Bubastis describe that function in technical terms. The field notes at Hieroglyphs document the engineered housing built for those instruments. The peer-reviewed research across veterinary science, acoustic physics, and biomedical study confirms the biological capabilities the function requires. And the permits to conduct any systematic acoustic survey of the site where all of this evidence converges have been pending without resolution since 2012. The inner sanctuary at Bubastis is still there, partially collapsed, accessible by permit that has not been issued. The first edition plates from Volume 11 of the Description de l'Egypte remain in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, unanalyzed as engineering documents. The 1972 acoustic survey report from the same site cannot be located in the ministry's current holdings. The site of ancient Hieroglyphs continues to be excavated in sectors that exclude the pre-dynastic northern precinct where Emery found the cat enclosures in 1950. The architectural specifications of those enclosures are recorded. The aperture positions and intervals are in the field notes. No acoustic analysis of what those specifications produce inside a sealed limestone room of those dimensions has been published. The granite walls of the Bubastis inner chamber still carry the register. Neville opened in 1887 and noted as unusual. The determinative markers are still there. The compound glyph, translated as "those who listen for the house," is still carved into that granite, documented in survey drawings held at Oxford, London, and Paris. The real reason ancient Egypt treated cats with the weight of law, capital protection, and 3,000 years of bronze commemoration is carved into red granite at the eastern edge of the Nile Delta and has been available for reading since 1887. It is still waiting for someone with the right permit and the right question to finally read it the way it was meant to be read.